Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion about how companies can scale reforestation by helping to tackle America's seed and seedling shortage, importantly, as we'll get into. My name is Daley. I'm president and CEO of American Forests, and we'll introduce our four panelists in a moment and give them a chance actually to introduce themselves in a little more detail. But first, I want to offer a couple of thoughts to anchor today's conversation, really kind of set up some themes that are going to run throughout our panels. And here's the first one, is that when we think about reforestation and we think about drivers for reforestation, it's really important to understand that climate change is killing our forests with alarming speed and efficiency. And look, this takes theme and variation all around the country. You're seeing a picture here of a devastating wildfire, but it's pest infestations in some parts of the country that are facilitated by warmer winters. It's more extreme windstorms in other areas and ice storms. All across the country, there are different ways in which climate change is causing an acceleration of forest loss. Just a couple of statistics. In the western United States, the extent of wildfire has more than doubled in the last few decades, and that's directly attributable to climate change. There's strong research showing that that's as a result of the way that climate change is actually changing our forests. It's basically drying them out and making them more vulnerable. And in California, just in 2020 and 2021 alone, wildfire burned more than 4 million acres, and here's the real kicker, so intensively that more than 40% of that land won't come back. It won't regenerate or regrow without our help. So this is a really important driver for why do we need to reforest, and also, as I'll speak about in a moment, how we need to reforest. Next slide, please. So think about that. That's kind of like the defense side of the equation. This is a neat tool, permission to multitask, reforestationhub.org. You're allowed to go in there while I'm talking and take a look at it. We created this to try, with our friends at the Nature Conservancy, to try to put on the internet an easily accessible resource for everyone to see data on where the reforestation opportunity exists nationally and how that relates to the carbon sequestration opportunity through reforestation. And this is everything from reforestation opportunities within urban and suburban areas all the way out to where, for example, we need to reforest after large wildfires like the one I showed you a picture of before. So this is really a mixture of places where we can add more trees to the landscape, for example, through agroforestry, call that playing offense, but also where, again, we need to defend the health of our existing forests by reforesting them when they're lost. And top line numbers, 148 million acres of reforestation opportunity of all those different kinds across the country. And fresh off the presses, this week, literally, some new calculations from our friends at the Nature Conservancy found that if we captured that whole reforestation opportunity, we could increase annual carbon sequestration in America's forests, trees and forests, by 535 million tons of CO2. That's about the equivalent of increasing our forest carbon sink by about 2/3. Huge opportunity. Next slide, please. So there's a bit of a catch, and it's why you're here, that if we want to do that reforestation, we actually have to have the trees to reforest with, the trees to plant. And that starts with collecting the right seeds and growing the right seedlings that we can align into that reforestation. And again, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy, we did an analysis to figure out how do the seed and seedling supplies line up with that amazing reforestation opportunity that I just showed you in the Reforestation Hub. And the answer is, just to do about half of that, we would need to well more than double the amount of seedlings that we're producing each year. To capture the whole of that opportunity that I just showed would take a more than threefold increase in the amount of seedlings that we're generating. And of course, correspondingly, the amount of seed that we're collecting has to step up as well. So a huge shortfall. What we're here to talk about today is it isn't a rounding error. It's not a small piece of the equation. This is a bottleneck that could actually trip up the entire reforestation movement if we don't solve for it. And so really importantly, and we'll get into this in much more detail in the panel, but if you follow the line of what I was saying, if climate change is stressing our forests and killing them with incredible speed, then when we replant them, We have to make sure that we're planting the right mix of tree species with the right genetics and planted the right way so they can actually be resilient to climate change into the future. And because we're not just planting carbon farms, we have to make sure that we're aligning that with the principles of biodiversity. So we're both planting forests that are going to be climate resilient and are going to help us with our needs around carbon sequestration, but also that can help us with the biodiversity crisis. And so it's really the geeky details of forestry. That's where we're going to figure that out. Fortunately, we have people here on the stage who are into the geeky details of forestry, and the kind of partnerships that we're building are really leaning into those scientific details so that we can line up the seed and seedling supplies with these climate and nature positive reforestation plans that we're developing. And then my last point is this, that I think this picture is also important because this is about trees, but it's also really about people. This work of reforestation, this work of seed collection and growing seedlings is an incredible opportunity to involve people in creating this magnificently positive change in the world. And we see that everything from creating about 25 jobs, direct, indirect, and induced jobs for every $1 million we invest in this work, but also volunteer opportunities from Girl Scouts to citizens groups finding their way into this kind of work. There are lots of people who can participate in this kind of work. And we believe really firmly that we don't just need to do good things in the world, but we need to do them together. We need to do them in ways that build community. And this work of building out the reforestation pipeline is an amazing opportunity to build more prosperous communities and more inclusive and connected communities as well. So those are all themes that you're going to hear from our experts as they talk about how we do this work and the kind of partnerships that we're building with nonprofits, with corporate partners, with government organizations, all coming together to fix overcome this challenge, to build the supply chain that we need to get reforestation done and get it done right. So with that said, I want to now turn to our 4 panelists and just let them actually introduce themselves. And the first is Austin Rempel, who's the Director of Forest Restoration at American Forest. So Austin, I'll just let you briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, Austin Rempel, Director of Forest Restoration. I'm based in Colorado. I am here to supply the geeky details. And I think I'm actually here to replace my colleague, Britta Dyer. Some of you may have been here to hear her speak. She'll have to come back next year. She had to cancel at the very last moment. But I am going to explain some of the work she's doing, the pioneering work on the West Coast after fire scars. But I can also bring my national level experience. I've worked at some level on almost every state who is experiencing this seed crisis. And lastly, I think this is the most important issue in reforestation at the moment. If you need to know one thing about reforestation in the US, this is it. So you're in the right place for that.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Austin. So next we have Bryan Van Stippen, who is the Program Director for the National Indian Carbon Coalition.
Saguli, I greet you in my traditional language as a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. I want to recognize that we are on traditional Pima tribes' lands at this facility today, but my role as the Program Director for the National Indian Carbon Coalition is to work with indigenous peoples throughout North America to help figure out how we can protect and preserve their tribal natural resources rather than extract or exploit those tribal natural resources. So we have relationships with a lot of organizations, including American Forest, which is why we are here today, on some new initiatives that we're starting to roll out in engagement with indigenous populations, which we include tribal nations in the continental United States, Alaska Native villages and corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, as well as First Nations in Canada. So we try to bring the great work with the technical expertise that entities like American Forest have and work with these indigenous communities to help protect and preserve and bring new streams of revenue into our tribal lands. So Yako, I thank you. I'm pleased to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks so much, Bryan. So next we have Anna Marciano, who is the Vice President of Sustainability for Nestle Zone North America and also the General Counsel and Head of Sustainability for Nespresso USA.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So excited to be here. For those of you who don't know Nestle, we're one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world. We pride ourselves on enhancing quality of life and contributing to a healthier future. We know that consumers rely on us to provide nutrition for their family are looking for high quality food. Here today specifically to talk about one of our companies in particular, Nespresso USA. As you mentioned, I have the privilege of being their general counsel and head of sustainability for them, and talk really about how we see coffee as having the opportunity to be a force for good and the positive impact that we can make. Everything from how we cultivate the coffee beans, how we impact the farmers in the local communities and improve the farming techniques with them, and then ultimately how our employees can also be engaged to make a positive impact at the end of the day, and our consumers enjoy a cup of coffee. We're most known at Nespresso USA for our single-serve capsules made out of 100% recyclable aluminum and that are recyclable in our recycling infrastructure, and really proud that within that infrastructure we're able to take the coffee grinds and actually use them for composting with organizations like American Forest as well. So tons that I can talk about, but really looking forward to sharing a little bit more information. I am a lawyer by training. Do not hold that against me during this discussion.
Great, thank you so much. And last, Talia Fried, who is the Program Officer for Backing Low Carbon Communities at American Express.
Hi, thanks for having me, and so good to be here with everyone. At American Express, we really believe that tackling climate change is really centered at the local level, which is why we've pledged $10 million to support sustainability, nature-based solutions, climate risk reduction and resilience, especially in cities and coastal communities around the world. And I'll be sharing a little today about how we're working with American Forest by pledging $1.1 million to support access to trees and climate resilient trees, green jobs in the tree care industry, and nursery capacity in 4 U.S. cities. I'm really happy to be here.
Great, thank you so much. All right, Austin, you're up first. So help set up the problem here. We've described a really significant mismatch, right, between the supply of seeds and seedlings. There's so much excitement about reforestation. Lots of different entities that want to see us drive towards that kind of potential that I described. And so talk through how we got here. How do we get to this bottleneck in the system? How American Forest and partners are approaching the problem, and really importantly, to the comment I made earlier, how do we make sure it's not just more seeds and seedlings, but how do we make sure that they're aligned with climate resilient and nature positive reforestation?
Thanks, Jed. So I can say that this issue came out of nowhere. A few years ago in 2020, I think it was a career peak in retrospect, but I had the opportunity to contribute to the nationwide nursery study that Jad described. And through that, I got to talk to most of the nursery managers and seed collectors in the US. So we polled, I think, about the folks who grow 90% of our seedlings in the US. And we came up with a lot of issues. One, being we don't have capacity to reach all these important goals that we had mapped up there for carbon, for wildlife, for watershed management. But honestly, seed didn't come up as often as you would think. If we were going to do that study now, 3 years later, that would be #1 issue. So some states said this was an issue. The Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, the southwestern states that are kind of at the forefront of climate change, they were saying that we don't have enough seed to grow any seedlings, much less the ones we want. But other states thought we kind of had this, we have enough seed and we have a pipeline for it. But that was in 2020 when a lot of things were falling apart. And one thing that fell apart over the course of that year was our seed collection pipeline. The people who had for decades been collecting these seeds, just kind of bringing in them like clockwork, they disappeared almost in every state. And there are many reasons behind this: retirements, getting sick, more retirements. And so that was one big issue. And that has completely changed the face of reforestation 3 years later. If this is honestly what state foresters all the way down to field level foresters want to talk about. So if we're going to do this study again, this would be the issue of us not being able to reach our seedling count because we don't have the seed. And as Jad said, it's not just any seed, it's climate smart seed. So why did this happen? A few things. It's a workforce issue. I mentioned retirements. It's also that they're not being replaced. People don't know how to get into this industry. People don't know that seed collection is something you can do. It's also hard. When we started talking about seed collection issue this year, kind of trying to broaden the messaging, people were like, oh, sign me up. This will be great. The fact is, it's actually very difficult work. It's highly seasonal. You need to be able to climb trees. You need to be comfortable with living in your van for 3 months of the year, getting sap on everything you own, and then finding another job, another role for the other 9 months of the year. So part of the thing we're doing in our workforce development is setting up these jobs so that they can focus just on seed for the times they need to do it and fight fires, work in nurseries, the rest of it. Setting up these jobs to be full-time has been a lot of the challenge. So we've had this workforce issue of people leaving, taking all of their knowledge with them, and people not coming up behind them to learn. And we are trying to solve that. And that's one of the hopeful messages, is that we can solve this. The other, and harder to solve piece of it, is climate. So fires every summer are taking out entire families of trees, in some cases entire species. So it's entire genotypes, families, gene banks of trees are getting wiped out by these fires. We also have diseases and beetles and insects coming through and wiping out species like the emerald ash borer. So we're having climate-driven issues taking out trees. I can also say that the trees we do have left are not producing seed the way they used to, because it takes a ton of energy for trees to produce seed. Whenever you see a tree full of cones and such, that took all of the energy that year. They didn't grow roots, they didn't grow leaves or needles. They spent all of their energy on cones. And when you're stressed, when you're experiencing heat wave after heat wave and drought after drought, you're not going to put that energy into cone crops. And we're seeing a lot of cases where we think we have a cone crop, we send people out to collect the seeds. They'll go back to the nursery and these seed crops aborted at the last thing. Seed abortions are a thing, and they're a big thing. So say at the 11th hour they called it off, and we can't grow any of the seedlings with this seed. So these issues are happening in every state, and it's pretty scary because this is hard. And so I'll give an example. In Arizona and other western states, ponderosa pine is kind of our bread and butter reforestation species, as we know how to grow it. And they only produce, under the best conditions, seed once every 7 years. And now we are starting to see it be more like 14 years or decades. So these are hard. This is scary. This is kind of what keeps me up at night sometimes. But one of the solutions is having people out there watching these trees. And at the moment, we don't have anyone out there. So that is kind of a scary message, but it really is coming down to the workforce and climate. And one of those is very solvable. And that is what my colleagues on the West Coast are doing with the California Reforestation Pipeline Cooperative. We started the year with basically 0 seed collectors, and now, as of August, we are going to have 14. That is tripling the number of seed collectors in the state. So this is possible, and a lot of that's been done through the support of the state and federal Forest Service, but also through corporations. So this is where I see hope, is getting people that know how to do this into the industry, and it's completely achievable. So I think as quickly as this issue emerged over the course of 2 or 3 years, we can get people in the field, and this won't be such an issue in 3 years' time. That's what I'm hopeful for.
Super helpful, and we'll actually get to that same model of corporate engagement in addressing both the workforce side of the pipeline, but also the physical infrastructure and other things is true in other landscapes as well. So it's really a proven approach, and it's an opportunity that's very real for some of the folks in the room. So Bryan, first of all, thank you so much for your leadership in helping to establish the National Indian Carbon Coalition. It's really an important organization. If anybody doesn't know it, please do go learn a lot more about this organization. They're doing a fantastic job. And so I wonder if you could speak about the role of tribes and tribal lands in this work, and that includes bringing traditional ecological knowledge into how we think about the resilience and growing the right forests the right way, and then also what are some of the kind of unique barriers and opportunities that you see for tribal actors in doing this work?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jad. And it is a very interesting opportunity that we're seeing right now. Again, I'm working with indigenous populations throughout North America. A few years ago, we were talking to some tribes over in Washington State and started having conversations with the Washington State DNR, and they said, hey, we need seedlings. We're making these commitments. We need to get more seedlings. We got to develop nurseries. And they gave me some astronomical price point, like $25, $30 million. But one of the reasons why the state needed so much money for tree nursery capacity was because they had to buy the land. And I was like, well, you know what? There's a lot of tribes in Washington State. And what the tribes have land. And we have nurseries that we have operating on some of those lands. So why are we trying to acquire land bases, taking that land out of the necessity of putting it into some sort of new workforce when we have this in Indian country? So after that conversation and developing a closer relationship with American Forests, we had a proposal put together that they brought forward for a funding source from CO2 to develop how do we get these plans in place so that we can get these projects going in Indian country. So right now we have two indigenous communities that we're working with, one in Washington State on the eastern side that, again, the land base is already there, the tribe is interested, they have the workforce, they're knowledgeable about how to manage their forested lands because they have a great forest department. And we have the traditional ecological knowledge on how do we actually maintain our lands because we've been doing it for time immemorial and we will continue to it for time immemorial because that's how long we are going to be around. You're not going to get rid of the tribes, you're not going to get rid of tribal lands. So we have the capacity, we don't have the funding, and part of it is that we need jobs in Indian country. We need not only jobs, but we need to build careers for our tribal youth. And as Austin's saying, we're losing that institutional knowledge just as much as any other organization. So again, I mentioned I'm a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. We had 33 people in our environmental department prior to the pandemic. Right now we have 6 because retirements, people lost. We have grant funds that we don't know how to use because the people that got the grants and had the experience to run the grants are no longer with the tribe, and we have a bunch of individuals that are trying to pick up the steam, but they just don't have the capacity. So through these efforts that we've been seeing, we believe that there's some strong opportunities for not only the workforce development, seedling capacity, but then being able to bring all of these to these great organizations that are trying to put these seedlings in the ground, including our tribal lands. We're looking again at what types of trees are important traditionally for tribal nations. You know, I'm from, again, Wisconsin. We're working with a lot of tribes in our area. Sugar maples are very important for cultural purposes and food sources for maple syruping. We've seen emerald ash borer taking out a lot of our trees in our area. So the tribes are actively trying to remove the ash, but we want to replant with sugar maple. And that's going to bring back a traditional food source, a traditional culturally appropriate tree type into our tribal lands. And we can do that throughout the area. We have another opportunity engaging with the Native Hawaiian organization. They have their greenhouse built already. So all we need to do is start helping develop the seed capacity for them. And their lands were cleared for sugar plantations. So they lost all of their traditional food sources, all of their traditional medicines, all of their culturally appropriate materials from the trees to the understory, and it's gone. How do we revitalize that land base? So if we can find the culturally appropriate seeds for this Native Hawaiian organization, they begin to grow the seed banks, and then we can start building up, elevating, reforest their lands with the culturally appropriate tree types that they want to see in their land base, and then be able to work with other landowners in the area to begin reforestation efforts from all these lands that were cleared for sugar plantations or pineapple farms that were taken from the Native Hawaiian people. So there's a lot of opportunity we see here. We got, again, a very small grant from CO2, which we're very grateful for the planning, but we need more assistance to get the actual work being done, seedlings being planted and regrown, seed types being collected that, again, when we reach out to the tribes and we ask their forestry people and we ask our tribal elders and leaders, what do you want to see replanted onto your tribal lands, that they know what trees were there 100 years ago and what those tree types were used for, again, for food sources and for medicines. So there's a tremendous opportunity here. Again, we appreciate everybody at the panel and all the organizations and everybody in this room, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We can create jobs for tribal youth, we can grow careers, we can help add additional revenue streams into these tribal nations so we don't have to rely so much on gaming and hospitality, and get this good work done, because we do. We have the land, we have the traditional ecological knowledge on our land base and how to manage these, and we just need some more oomph. We need a little bit more push here, and that's why we're attending Greenbiz. That's why we're partnering with organizations like American Forest Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, Arbor Day Foundation, and we work with all these groups to get this good work done. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about the work that we're doing in Indian country and with indigenous communities. We just need to take that next step. So again, I appreciate it, and I really appreciate Chad and American Forest letting me be up here today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's so exciting to hear those kind of creative partnerships. You know, instead of banging our head against the door, we actually try the knob and say, hey, wait a second, how we put our capacities together in a way that's complementary. And now that pathway to scale that you've created is so exciting. And thank you for naming some of our great partners in the room. This has to be an us thing. Let's be super clear. All of our private and public sector organizations need to crowd into this work together to get this right, 110%. So Anna and Talia, I'm going to turn to you. And so Anna, if they're coming, I'm going to start with you. Nestle knows a few things, and Nespresso knows a few things about supply chains, so probably this whole concept that we're talking about here is very familiar to you. But could you talk a little bit about the work that you're engaged in and helping to make possible, and kind of, you know, why it appealed to your company and how it kind of fits into your overall strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. As you just mentioned, we're so reliant on the natural resources to produce the products that our consumers are enjoying, and we want to make sure that we're doing it in a sustainable way so that we can have these resources in the future. So Nespresso has been committed to agroforestry for over 20 years, you know, really thinking about best farming practices to get the best coffee crops possible. And we started planting trees because it's good for the coffee beans. They grow really well in shaded areas. And so to improve the quality of the coffee, improve the farming practices as well, we were investing globally. And to be honest, in the US, we were like, wait a second, what are we doing? Here are our global partners. They're doing such amazing work on the coffee farms. There has to be something that we can do. And so we reached out to American Forest and said, how can we help? Like, how could you not help hearing the crisis, seeing the images? We know that we have the money to donate, to make a difference, absolutely to contribute, to help to make the world better, to help solve this problem, but also as a food and beverage company, we're marketing. So to raise awareness for issues, to bring light to these issues, we could be leveraging some of our resources to do that as well. And what we absolutely loved with collaborating and still collaborating with American Forest is because we can have the conversation to say, what else do you need? What's happening? So we had to sit there and say, yes, while we know farming practices, we had to be humble about it and say, we don't know about planting trees. What do you need? How can we help? And so, you know, we started in California. Obviously, it's in our backyard. We have significant consumer presence for the Nespresso brand, near and dear to us, to make sure that it was reflecting the desires of our employees and our consumers, and also in Texas. And very recently, we actually did a project right in New Jersey. So Nespresso USA is headquartered in New York City. And our employees really wanted the opportunity to be able to make a difference and have an impact. And so we were able to actually have a volunteer day where our CEO went out with about 50 of our employees and actually planted trees. They were taking the seedlings, like really understanding what this was. And the buzz is still, how can we get involved? You know, we limited it to 50 people because of, you know, some supply constraints. Not enough trees, I think part of it as well. They're already signed up for the next event, and we don't even have a date and time scoped yet. So it was really invigorating for our employees. So for us, it was hearing there's an issue. It's a concrete way that we can engage. It's a way for us to do both the environmental impact that we're looking to do, right, address the climate issue, but also the social impact as well. Like, how can we enable our employees to volunteer, to be actively engaged in this? And I have to tell you, as you're talking to us about the tribes and the future youth, the social impact we can make by enabling that to happen, I'm so much more excited to hear about what else can we be doing as a corporation to be able to support these initiatives.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So Talia, you in your introduction, you got us into thinking about, hey, wait a second, you know, we need trees in cities too. And in fact, more specifically, we need tree equity in our cities. Make sure that we remedy the gross and insupportable inequities in tree cover that track on income and track on race in our cities. And so we're just so grateful for the way that American Express is really leaning into that. In fact, we're going to be out planting together tomorrow to help bring tree equity to Phoenix. But really appreciate that you all thinking about, well, wait, how does this whole seedling supply chain relate to urban forests too, where we need just as much forestry precision and excellence as we need out in large natural landscapes? And so if you could just talk a little bit about what led you all to engage in this work in this way.
Yeah, so, cities are an absolutely essential piece of the puzzle when looking at how to address climate change. Cities are really a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions around the world. They're about 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions right now, and we know that city populations are only growing. So that disproportionate contribution of emissions is only going to rise unless something is done about it. On the flip side, cities are also very much on the front lines of climate change and the hurricanes and floods and droughts, right? They're often on coastlines. Their cement is exacerbating increasing heat levels. So while they're also really, responsible for the emissions, they're really feeling the impacts of climate change that are already here. I also want to add that nature is also an absolutely critical lever and tool in the fight against climate change and protecting the environment. Nature can account for 30% of the climate action needed to meet our world's global climate goals, and have all these multiplying effects that we've been discussing today. So those are just two of the touch points. But I also think it's important to mention that in addition to advancing climate solutions, our ESG strategy at Amex includes promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as building financial confidence. And a really exciting component of the work that we're doing with American Forests is, their work around hiring and training underrepresented communities, young people who've historically been excluded from the tree care industry, from green jobs, and providing those opportunities and job placements. And so, seeing those multiple touch points in this work that American Forests is doing across our ESG strategy, and Chris, touching upon all those three pillars is really exciting for us. And yeah, I'm really grateful for all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that insight. And so, Austin, I want to come back to you and maybe just fill in a little bit more detail on something that a good number of folks in this crowd are also into the geeky details of forestry. And I think everyone here wants to make sure, are we really serious about it? Do we have the science side of this right? Could you just talk a little bit about how in these landscapes, and similarly in urban forestry, how are we figuring out the science of doing climate and nature positive reforestation? So how is that being translated into the field, into a roadmap that we can follow consistently and that we can build a supply chain around?
It ain't easy. So one of the reasons, I forgot to talk about something. This is the cue. So there was a photo up during my introduction. It was kind of a grainy photo of a seedling. But that seedling had significance because it was in Northern California's campfire. But the seed had come from Southern California. And we think that that seedling had kind of a genetic playbook for dealing with drought and heat because it had lived in Southern California, closer to San Diego. And that is the climate that we see coming for the campfire, which is in sort of central Northern California near Chico. That is a really long distance, and that is what climate change is doing. It's shifting climates that much that we think a tree from Southern California knows more about the future than trees that have sort of evolved in Northern California. And I can say that that seedling is still there, still alive, and it's growing more quickly than the local seedlings. So there's promise to this, and it's going to take a while to figure out. But we have all sorts of scientific tools that people have been working on like it's their job, because it is. And we have mapping tools to say, okay, pick any point in the US, what is the climate going to be like in 50 years, 100 years? And then we can look to where are there trees that maybe know how to grow in this environment, know how to turn off their leaves in the winter, turn them on in the exactly right time in the spring. So we have the tools to do this, and part of the challenge is making sure the seed collectors and nursery folks and foresters know how to access this information. So there's kind of a training component. So, and there's also a science component. For every fire scar, we need to treat this as an opportunity. We need to put together a plan that incorporates this science, and it's kind of a playbook for we need to plant this species because it's going to want to live there in the future, different than what was there in the past. And here's the seed we need to collect. And right now, we're honestly having to stop a lot of projects. Every time you see a fire scar on the TV, quite often we're looking at that and we'll call the nursery and say like, here is the seed we want. They'll say, we don't have that species. We certainly don't have it from, southern Arizona where you're asking for it. And that's the issue. That's part of the collection issue.
For people to have a sense of how much intensity is going into getting the science figured out, so that essentially writing plans at landscape scales that can guide this work, and similar in urban areas as well, kind of working out game plans that all the different actors can follow together, so we can ultimately engineer these supply chains and do this work the right way. I think for folks to just understand how much is already in motion, but also to your point, how much still remains to be done. Right, we're in the early infancy of moving to this climate and nature informed reforestation. So all of us have to work together to fill the gaps there, so that we have that roadmap in place, consistently. So Bryan, talk about a couple of things. We know that you're working on developing business models for the work that you all are standing up, and also that you talked about the opportunity for corporate partners and other kind of partners to really come in and scale up their engagement. Can you kind of talk about that? How you're ultimately preparing the way to scale up, but also sort of creating these docking opportunities, if you will, for other folks to come in, and how should they be thinking about the ideal ways to partner with the kinds of efforts that you're standing up?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that forward, Jad. And for the longest time at the National Indian Carbon Coalition, I was a team of one. In the last 6 months, I was able to bring on our first staff member. So it's been a lot of legwork to get to where we are today, working with these tribes, working with these indigenous populations. But we do need assistance. And we're a tribally owned and operated not-for-profit organization. So my goal is that any of these dollars that come through our organization are going back directly into those indigenous communities and getting back into the tribe's hands. Our mission is to ensure that any revenues generated from these types of projects can then go back and be to purchase lands within the exterior boundaries of the reservations. So back in the 50s, we had a termination area. Many tribes in the United States lost their entire land base. In the 70s, most of those tribes were then reinstated as a tribal sovereign nation, but then had no more lands. So we help try to figure out what type of solutions can we bring forward. Again, nature-based solutions, focusing specifically on the protection of those natural resources, because again, for such a long period of time, any partners coming in to tribal communities were doing extraction, and those materials leave the reservation, and we're left with the natural disaster mess. Mining, gold mines, nickel mining, platinum mining, extraction of the timber, whatever it may be, but that money was only getting nickels to the dollar back to the tribal nations, because they were not the ones that were benefiting from the majority of that revenue. So for my first 5 years at the National Indian Carbon Coalition, I was exclusively focusing on Indian country. Like, how do I get tribes to engage? How do I help educate them as to what these projects entail and what the good opportunities they are to look at preserving these land bases rather than just doing these extraction techniques, and have to get into their tribal council chamber and do presentations to tribal membership, be in front of large crowds telling them, like, you can do this, and it's there is controversy to it. That's not easy. There's going to be hit pieces out there. We're going to rattle and shake some doors, but we got to get this type of work done. And then I finally realized, like, oh man, like, I can't do this on my own. And said, I need to start working on the other side, start working with the philanthropic entities, start working with the other foundations, start working with the corporates. That's where the funding source is. And again, like I began, we have the land base. We have that traditional ecological knowledge on how to manage that land base. We know how to manage our forests. One of the tribes which we're working with in the state of Washington, which as of yesterday morning approved the development of a carbon project on their land, the Yakima Nation. They do a clearing of their forests compared to the national and state forests around them to ensure that if there is a forest fire that comes through their area, that their old growth forest remains. And they know through years of data science and development that they have developed that this is going to be a great opportunity for them to create and hold a healthy forest system. Even if there is a natural disaster, if there's a forest fire, that would have a dramatic effect on the other state, national forest and lands around them that are not being actively managed as the tribes are doing. So we're preparing for this. Tribes have been doing this work. I mean, we know where we need to put our time and effort, It's the funding that is the hard part a lot of times for these tribes because, again, they were focusing so much on extraction techniques of logging that they no longer want to do that type of thing. But we also then have to make up for the jobs that might be lost in those commercial logging operations. So there's multiple different factors that we have to take into consideration here. But it does start. It starts with training our youth, building up a career path for these kids to get into this because, like Austin's saying, like, we don't know. I didn't know until I started working in this industry that there was even these types of opportunities out there. I'm just starting to do a lot of work on soil lands. And the first time I ever talked to a soil person, I'm like, oh, you do some stuff in the dirt, and like, oh, it's soil. I'm like, sorry guys, I did not realize that. I got yelled at real fast. So there's soil scientists out there. So now I'm trying to bring a soil scientist on board to work with some of our other partners that we're doing grazing, row crop, grassland type projects. But I never even knew there was that option, that opportunity. And if we're going to be doing this work on tribal lands, we need tribal members to be doing that work. Because there is a lot of great people that want to help, but we need to start training our own people to do this type of stuff as well. And that's where we really see these opportunities on workforce development and really showing that we can be leaders in this industry. We can blaze the path for everybody else to follow because, again, we have the lands. We need to protect it. We need to reforest it. We need to put the true traditional tree types that are important to the tribes back into that landscape and continue to do the good work. And then we'll bring everybody else along behind. We'll show you what we're doing in Indian country, and you can follow our work. I have no problem with that. But we need everybody's assistance and help with this because of the technical assistance, the technical capacity, the skill sets that we just don't have. And I'm an attorney as well, so don't hold that against me. But I'm a retiring attorney, recovering attorney, I like to say. So, this has been a great opportunity, a great experience. But there's a lot of work that remains ahead, and I need to build out my staff capacity. I need to start utilizing the connections that we have with organizations like American Forest to get these individuals trained up. We found a perfect program, we think, through one of the staff members, Brian Morris at AF, that says, hey, it's an online tree nursery capacity program. You guys can get people enrolled, and we can train them remotely on how to do this work. Because we do have nurseries in Indian country, a lot of times they're underperforming because we just don't have the knowledge base, the skill set to effectively manage those. We get a little bit of money, get a little bit of seeds going, and we can get some tribal members trained up. I think this stuff will be rocking and rolling in a couple of years.
Incredibly exciting. Thank you so much. All right, so first, warm up your questions. You're next. The microphone's going to you next, but one last question to the panel, so think hard. So on Natalia, we want to get into how you were able to make the shift to a systems level investment like this. It's really quite non-traditional still in this field, right? I mean, American Forest has been doing corporate partnerships around reforestation for decades. And I think one of the reasons why those partnerships were successful in the early years is that a tree is an easy thing to count, it's an easy thing to understand, it's an intuitive metric. Your impact that you're having on this whole supply chain is a little harder to explain, I'm sure, internally as well as externally to external audiences. And so would love your insights on how were you able to make this, really take this holistic approach and get the right support internally, kind of work that into how you think about your work, but also communicating to others. And are there any lessons that we could all learn as we're trying to work with corporate partners in this more holistic model? Are there any kind of best practices you would extract from how you've been developing these kind of programs and how we could all work with you most effectively?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I'll start by saying, we are really committed to the longer term solutions and steps to get us to those longer term goals. As a few examples, I mentioned we have the $10 million pledge by 2025 to support environmental initiatives. We've committed to reach net zero by 2035, and these are important but longer term goals that really get at more of the systems change elements of the work that needs to be done. And in terms of what we do look for in terms of our partnerships and donations, at first in line with our ESG strategy, really looking at where's the biggest need and opportunity, where are the gaps, and really listening to local community members and people within the communities that are being impacted, about what are the biggest opportunities and the solutions, right? And how can those solutions have multiplying benefits? Looking at how can a program that might seem, really climate forward, also have gender equity opportunities, or like we've been talking about, job opportunities, and really have those maximized outcomes for the community, and again, really determined by those local communities. So, I think some advice would be, firstly, looking at what are those meaningful KPIs. I think it's really important to, in programs, throwing out any templates and really looking at the community needs and what are the outcomes that are really supporting a program, and maximizing those impacts across the kind of different issue areas that we can support.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it wasn't as difficult as maybe some would think it is. When we think of sustainability, we're thinking of how to make the world sustainable in the future, and we know that that involves the E and the S as a company, right? That's been ingrained with how we do engage in farming practices. So Nestle is very proud for cocoa farmers. We will pay them living income. We will incentivize them, pay extra for cocoa beans. We'll do the same for coffee as well, because we know that it takes different techniques to care for the long term. It's much cheaper to get a quick fix. To be able to have that sustained impact, it's going to take a lot of resources, it's going to take time. We also cultivate coffee. That takes a long time, that process, for that coffee bean to grow. And I tell you, we're heartbroken when crops are destroyed because of climate change, because of hurricane, because of a bad crop season. We feel with our farmers that struggle. And it's because we are used to cultivation, it takes a long time. We're okay investing in things that don't have an immediate impact today. So we're almost wired to say, okay, I'm investing today, and I may see some benefit in the future, or I may not, and that's okay too. And so I think oftentimes corporations in particular try to do the same thing over and over, right? Because they're like, oh, we know that works. Let's just keep doing that. We all know, keep doing this same thing over and over again, definition of insanity, or potentially not motivating, not inspiring, not engaging. Like, how many times are you going to go to your board and say, I want to do this project again for the 50th year? They're going to be like, and how are we going to talk about this? From a marketing standpoint, how are you going to get consumers excited about that? You're probably not. And so it's because we're constantly thinking of innovation, what's next, what's down the pipeline, that we'll take chances in, you need seedlings? Okay, let's try that. All right, maybe the first year works, great. Maybe it doesn't. What else can we do? What other support do you need? And then also, how can you leverage our resources as well? So it's not always the dollars, and that's the advice that I would give to companies that are thinking they're, some may be sitting in the room going, Nestle, of course, you have money. You've pledged billions of dollars of investment in the sustainability realm. It's not just the dollars. It is that expertise that you might have in a particular area, the farming practices. It is leveraging your marketing team to get visibility. One of the things we were so proud to be able to do with American Forest is actually during Day of Giving is raise awareness, or during Earth Day, raise awareness for the amazing work that American Forest is doing and linking our consumers to your page to make donations. Now, did that cost us anything? Yes, time and energy. But we were already going to be putting out content for Earth Day. We were just finding an amazing partner to collaborate with to drive a change, raise the awareness, and hopefully you guys got some extra funding from it. So I would say think creatively too. Don't think just because you don't have a checkbook to take out that there's nothing you can do. There are plenty of things that you can do. And finally, your employees. They care, especially Gen Z. They want to work for a company that's purpose-driven. They want to be engaged in activities. And collaborations with American Forest in particular gives them the opportunity to get involved and get involved right away, because they can be helping with the tree plantings. They can be going out into, the urban cities and getting more involved as well. So don't underestimate the power of being more purpose-driven, and boards get that. They get it, that it's a retention factor as well and an attraction.
Super. Thank you both so much for those perspectives. Really, really helpful, I'm guessing, to a lot of folks in the room. Okay, your turn. Yeah, I'm going to do my Phil Donahue routine, run the mic out.
Talia, first statement: as you're managing your projects in urban environments, please have them plant female trees. There is a major pollen issue in cities. I live in Philadelphia. Tree pollen is terrible. They don't plant female trees because they produce fruit, and fruit is annoying on sidewalks to clean up, blah, blah, blah. But really helpful for seed bank development. Anyway, this is my own personal gripe. I'm just putting in a plug since you're planting trees in cities.
Thank you.
I hate tree pollen. It ruins my springs every year. Anyway, back to the climate and forest. My question specifically around American Forest and then the Indian Carbon Coalition is, as we're seeing tree ranges shifting, are you taking that into effect as you're looking at seed banks and how you're replanting, because we're seeing ranges moving further north of southern trees, et cetera? And is that something that you're maybe finding a positive in as you're looking at the modeling and where things are going? Is that, oh, but these trees more north are doing better at production?
Thanks for the question. Austin, you want to take that one first, or Brian, or who would like to take that one?
All right. So the answer is yes. It takes a while, like maybe after the seedling is born, after it germinates, it takes a long time for us to see performance differences. Sometimes the growth upside is 50 years from now. So they grow the same rate as normal seedlings, but then 50 years they take off. We've seen that quite a bit. So it can take a while to tell, but all of the early data says that us moving around trees, taking them from sort of the smarter areas like you referred to, that's a winning strategy, and that's kind of our adaptation opportunity. That's how with every planting we can make the next forest better. And so far, most of what we know has come from the timber industry. They've been growing trees and sort of selectively breeding trees to know how to grow them as timber. We're going to take all that knowledge and turn it to climate adaptation. So does that help answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, and I just to know of the actual seed banks. Are you seeing that the seed banks, the tree seed banks further north, if they kind of are on that transition of species, are they more productive now
Yep.
than the further south ones that maybe aren't having quite a don't? I mean, I know it's really the transition, but that's like you're going to see potential shifts, but kind of, I didn't know if you saw any positive from the seed banks. We talked a lot about the sadness of it, but I
Yeah.
didn't know if there was some positive from that.
There's definitely some positive in that we can harness that adaptation potential and kind of move trees around quicker than they grow. They can throw seed maybe 100 feet every year, so we can do it a lot quickly. So long-winded way to say yes.
Yeah, and Native communities have the best knowledge bank of any community, so that was why I also wanted to direct that question to you. If you found that your communities are naturally adapting the environment around them based on what they're seeing.
And that is a great point, because, even though we have a lot of lands that tribes manage and maintain, we cannot pick those lands up and move them out of the climate that they're in. So I had a tribal leader tell me the other day, hey, this sounds like a really great idea, because we've seen our lands change over time. He's like, since I've been here living on the reservation, I've seen how our tree types have changed. This tribe is in northern Minnesota. We know climate's changing. 10, 20 years ago, there was no turkeys, there was no coyotes. Now we're seeing an influx of these animals moving, and along with that, we're seeing different tree types that were never really on that reservation lands in the past, but they're being beneficial. The problem is, again, was the emerald ash borer started coming into their lands as well, so we want to figure out what are those trees that are going to be important for the tribe, and what can we get into that land base and help make this change occur, because we see it every day on our tribal lands, and we've been trying to address it. We haven't been vocal enough, and we need to start showing from the tribal perspective of this good work that tribes are doing, because a lot of times, and even for myself at my organization, I am not a social media person, and we never push out anything that we're doing, and I gotta start being better at that kind of stuff, because we have the ability, the skill set, the knowledge, we just need to find the right partners.
And just quick note on the urban side, we actually partnered with the U.S. Forest Service on a climate and health-focused urban forestry guide, and it includes addressing things like pollen and VOCs as part of thinking about the health dimensions of urban tree canopy and management and species selection. So love to share that with you if you'd be interested.
So my name's Jake. I'm from Living Carbon. The reason why I'm so excited is that I think I've seen a lot of reports on the seedling shortage. We've been focused on, so we're a plant biotechnology company, focused on really building up a platform, capabilities for identifying certain genotypes and genetic traits. Sort of to your point, Jad, the timber industry's been doing this for a long time. We have the ability, we have the technology to do things in a different fashion. So my question is, can we take what we're doing in sort of a lab format and not necessarily shortcut, but augment some of the work that might need to be done in the field or what has been done in the field to get there faster? It just has my wheels spinning, and I'm just wondering if maybe there's something we can do to help.
So that's kind of a mad scientist question. I love it. It's so I think trees evolve very slowly over time, and I mean, are you talking about sort of genetic engineering, maybe, or is that the wrong word to use? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, we've been doing a version of genetic engineering with tree breeding for the longest time. Like the trees they're planting in Idaho for timber are very different than the ones that you'll see in the forest. So I do think we can speed it up by maybe years. What took decades, what took centuries maybe, we can do it in a few years. I really hope so, because yeah, we have to.
I think we have to be careful, though, too, to not interfere too much with nature either. This could really backfire on us in not doing it the right way, I think. I'm not the expert. I'm not the tree geek. Let me just state that. But if we've learned anything, especially from the indigenous people and Native Americans, is that they know how to care for the land, and it takes time. So I get it, we're all eager, we want to make a difference right away, but let's do it the right way as well. I love the idea of, hey, we can like shift plants and have them do something, but I cringe at the idea of like a genetically modified tree suddenly doing something for us, but maybe there are scientists out there that can, have a different thought on it. I just feel like there may be consequences that we're not even appreciating to something like that. So it really is a patience game, and I know people get very frustrated, especially with corporate America, that our climate pledges and our commitments are so far out. Like, I always get criticized. Why is it that Nestle can't do it sooner? You guys have the money. You're hearing why. It takes time. Investments today won't show their impact until 10, 15 years, 20 years even, longer. So I would also say to other corporate colleagues in the room, have the patience and stand your ground knowing that you're doing the best you can with the information we have, and as things evolve, continue to be open-minded and make those investments.
Thank you. And for anyone who's interested in pursuing that discussion a little bit more, like up front afterwards, there are some really exciting examples and diverse examples across the country, actually, of where essentially a natural form of genetic engineering is producing some really exciting results. Folks might have heard, for example, that the white bark pine was recently listed under the Endangered Species Act, the widest ranging tree ever listed under the Endangered Species Act. And this is the tree that kind of defines the high country of the entire western United States. It's an ecological keystone, really, to the high country of the western United States. And so there absolutely is a way to engineer resilience in the white bark pine that we replant. But it's really about leaning into that kind of natural engineering, including the critical role that tribal partners are playing in bringing traditional ecological knowledge into the formula. And there are just sort of examples of that kind of collaboration, success stories all around the country. So I'd love to dig in on that with anyone who's interested afterwards. And unfortunately, I wish there had been like a 3-hour session, because I bet we could keep going for a really long time, but I believe we are out of time. So grateful to you all. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. We'll definitely hang out. Love to chat with anyone afterwards. And just appreciate your time today.